When a TV show dies, they're often remembered, but not all of them endure. A show that's remembered lives on in the minds of its fans, but a show that endures brings new people into its world even if there are no new episodes coming out. During its life, 6 Feet Under had a strong reception, particularly as a critical darling where it soaked up awards and basked in what was often dubbed the new golden age of television. 6 Feet Under didn't quite capture the attention of the public the way The Sopranos or Sex and the City did, and it didn't grow a cult following like The Wire, but it was nonetheless an important part of the lineup of HBO shows that helped set the standard for a prestige format of television. Now that we're 20 years into the future, I wanted to look at the life of the Fisher family, how they were conceived, how they lived in their family-owned funeral home, and what remains after their departure. The story of 6 Feet Under starts with its creator, Alan Ball. In 1999, he found major success having written the movie American Beauty. A massive hit, it grossed over $350 million worldwide and won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay. Ball's background up to that point had been in comedy, writing for the sitcoms Grace Under Fire and Sybil. As American Beauty was in theaters, he was also working on the struggling sitcom Oh, Grow Up. It was a strange dichotomy for him.
There was a People magazine, the best and worst of 1999, and it said the best movies in American Beauty was on this page, and you turned it, and literally on the other page it said the worst TV shows, and Oh, Grow Up was one of them. It made me a lot more thick-skinned, and it fueled 6 Feet Under.
The success of American Beauty led Ball to a meeting with Carolyn Strauss from HBO, who had an idea for him.
She said, I have this idea that I've been playing around with. I would like to do a show that is set in a family-run funeral home. And something in my head just went click.
Although he found the idea intriguing, Ball was busy with Oh, Grow Up and couldn't pursue it further. However, when his sitcom was canceled in late 1999, Ball decided that he would pursue the funeral home project. In an interview with Collider, he said, "I knew that HBO wanted a show about a funeral home, so I just wrote the show that I would want to watch on HBO. That was right around the time where The Sopranos had just started airing, and I, like everybody else, was totally in love with it and kind of amazed at what television could be that I just hadn't thought it could be." Part of the reason the idea struck a chord with Ball was due to early tragedies in his life. In the introduction for the 6 Feet Under companion book, Better Living Through Death, he wrote, "When I was 13 years old, my sister Marianne was driving me to my piano lesson when she pulled out from a blind intersection into the path of an oncoming car. It slammed into her side of our 1973 Ford Pinto, breaking her neck and killing her instantly, and cleanly slicing my life in two, everything before the accident and everything after. And the brief, eternal instant between those two lives where old, familiar possibilities end forever and new, unimagined possibilities are painfully born." Ball would face several other deaths in his family at a young age, giving him a lot of time in funeral homes and piquing a curiosity in the grieving process. Additional inspiration was provided by a few books he read, including The American Way of Death by Jessica Mitford, which Strauss had suggested to him. He also took inspiration from The Undertaking, Life Studies from the Dismal Trade, and Bodies in Motion and at Rest, on Metaphor and Mortality, both by Thomas Lynch, a writer who had also worked as an undertaker. Ball would say this about the 2 books by Lynch: "These 2 collections of essays about life as an undertaker give me a sense of the tone I wanted the show to have." After having written the pilot script, Ball was shocked by HBO's response.
Alan said how he did the first draft and brought it back to Carolyn, and she said, I shall use another word, but she said, "Can't you make it a little more screwed up?" And he was very happy that she said that. He thought, "Oh, good, now I can have a lot of fun writing this."
The original title for the series was Afterlife, but a Japanese movie already used that title, so they went instead with 6 Feet Under, referencing not just the subject matter, but the themes of the series. Writers on the series were given a considerable amount of influence over their respective episodes. They weren't just the writers, but also producers, so they would be involved with casting, filming, and all the other components of bringing an episode to life. When the show began searching for its principal cast, frequently the actors came from the world of theater. Peter Krause was cast as Nathaniel Fisher Jr. Since he has the same name as his father, I'll be calling him Nate, and his father Nathaniel. Krause had recently left the Aaron Sorkin series Sports Night, which, much like Alan Ball's sitcom Oh, Grow Up, had just been canceled by ABC. Ball had first met Krause on the set of Sybil several years prior. Krause was first told he'd be reading for the character of David, but was then asked to read for the role of Nate.
I thought, this is going to be one of those things where they like me for David, and I'm going to go and read for Nate, and I'm not going to get either role. And then I looked at the script again and noticed there were some striking similarities between Nate and myself at the time.
In an interview, Krause would elaborate on the strength of the script, saying, "When I read the pilot script, I didn't put it down. I read it in one sitting without interruption. And when I turned that last page, I knew this is going to be HBO's next big series." The character of Nate was originally meant to be the normal one amongst his bizarre family. In an interview, Alan Ball described him as a Marilyn Munster type who would highlight how much stranger the people around him were. Nate's life is upended when he's brought back into the world of his family's funeral home. He learns that he has a special ability to empathize with others and be present for them in one of their most difficult moments.
Why are you still here anyway? Why don't you go back to Seattle?
Because I would miss the joyful sense of belonging I get here.
Michael C. Hall was cast as the younger Fisher brother, David. Before 6 Feet Under, Hall was performing on stage in New York City as the MC in Cabaret, a role so distant from David Fisher it ironically made perfect sense to the actor. He explained in an interview saying, "I think a part of having a sense of how to slip into David was informed by the fact that I was playing the MC. I flung all these doors wide open playing this pansexual, somewhat sinister party thrower, and I just slammed all those doors shut on David right there, the definition of repression." Hall was immediately taken with the script and prepared heavily for the audition. Speaking to that audition, Alan Ball said, "He's an example of somebody who just comes in and nails the audition. All right, well, that's the guy. He knew exactly how to play this character." As the Fisher son who stayed behind, David lives as the dutiful successor to his father Nathaniel in the family funeral home, all the while hiding the fact that he's gay.
What did I do with my life? I went to school to learn exactly how to do this stuff. Other kids my age were going to frat parties. I was draining corpses and refashioning severed ears out of wax.
Frances Conroy was cast as Ruth Fisher. Conroy had been an actor on stage for several decades, including receiving a Tony nomination for her role in The Ride Down Mount Morgan. She was an immediate favorite of 6 Feet Under casting directors Libby Goldstein and Junie Lowry Johnson.
Frances Conroy's name came up.
Yes.
And it was like, everybody who knew Frances, it was like, that is perfect.
Speaking about the role, Conroy said, "Most shows usually just put the mother in the background or make her smile a lot. You don't find out that much about her, but you find out a lot about Ruth, and I thought that was compelling." Probably the most tightly wound of an already repressed family, Ruth is tasked with the challenge of rediscovering and redefining herself in an age when you might imagine you'd have that part figured out.
She's grief-stricken, okay? Fuck propriety.
We don't say that word!
Lauren Ambrose was cast as Claire Fisher, the youngest member of the family. Ambrose began her career on stage, though she also appeared in the movie Can't Hardly Wait and several episodes of Party of Five. The pilot immediately piqued her interest when she read it. Ambrose was a favorite of Ball, and he gave her some advice during the audition.
She was like, I don't do drugs. I've never done crystal meth. What is it like?
I mean, quote him, he was like, just really fucked up.
Ball's support was particularly helpful as Claire was closely tied to the show's creator.
I think people really related to Claire because Claire was Alan's proxy in writing the story. You know, I think he's the youngest in his family, and he had a lot of Claire in him.
As the youngest child in the Fisher family, Claire often feels forgotten and spends much of the series exploring who she might become.
This is actually happening. And now I'm high on crack.
Crystal.
What up?
Rachel Griffiths was cast as Brenda Chenoweth, Nate's love interest in the first season. Griffiths had appeared in several movies, receiving an Oscar nomination for her role in Hillary and Jackie. Like many of the other actors, she was drawn by the strength of the pilot script.
And I had this same reaction to Brenda that I had when I read Rhonda from Muriel's Wedding. I literally thought that it was written for me.
What sealed the role for Griffiths was the chemistry she had with Peter Krause. When the two of them read together, it won them their respective parts.
No, the first time I met him, I was like, okay, I want to work with him. How do I not fall in love with him?
Highly intelligent and an acute observer of others, Brenda brings an outsider's wisdom to the Fisher family, all while having a chaotic personal life herself.
Are you ever going to tell me your name?
Probably not.
Why not?
Because I'm a realist.
Freddie Rodriguez was cast as Federico Diaz, the restorative artist working for the Fishers. Rodriguez had roles in Dead Presidents and Can Hardly Wait, though he had first met Alan Ball while working on the sitcom Oh Grow Up. Impressed with his ability as an actor, the role of Rico was written specifically with Rodriguez in mind.
And I go in and I audition and I get it. And I think it was like on our first day of shooting or second day, he pulls me to the side and he said, I wrote this with you in mind.
Speaking about that in an interview, Ball said, I did have Freddie Rodriguez in mind because he'd done a couple of guest spots on Oh Grow Up, and there was something about him and his intensity that I just thought was great. Rico exists both within and outside of the Fisher and Sons funeral home. Having been an apprentice to Nathaniel Fisher and being very gifted as a restorative artist, he's very passionate about his work and believes he deserves more than to just be an employee.
Yeah, I know Shirley. I remember Shirley.
Really?
Yes. I was the person who sewed her hair back on. That was me.
The last member of the principal cast is Matthew St. Patrick as Keith Charles, David's boyfriend. Prior to 6 Feet Under, St. Patrick had appeared on the soap operas General Hospital and All My Children. Upon taking the role, St. Patrick was at first cautious of Keith becoming a stereotype.
I was cautious in the beginning, honestly. I didn't want to do anything that was stereotypical. I know about stereotypes.
Keith is very much a counterpoint to David's timid conservative demeanor. Out and proud of it, Keith is constantly encouraging David to live without shame.
I know you're gay.
I think Father Jack has a pretty good idea.
I think he likes you.
These 7 actors would make up the main cast throughout all 5 seasons of the show. They were joined by several recurring characters, though. One of the more memorable ones was Richard Jenkins as Nathaniel Fisher. Although his character dies in the opening scenes of the pilot, he would return several times throughout the run of the series, as characters would frequently imagine his presence. Each time, very interestingly, he would be playing a different role because there was no fixed version of Nathaniel, rather, the version of Nathaniel each character had in their mind. Other notable actors who were frequently recurring on the series included Jeremy Sisto as Brenda's erratic brother Billy, Justina Machado as Rico's wife Vanessa, and James Cromwell as George, a love interest for Ruth in later seasons. 6 Feet Under also had numerous memorable guest stars, many of whom would go on to have huge success later on in their careers, such as Rainn Wilson, Jenna Fischer, Adam Scott, Zachary Quinto, and Chris Pine. And of course, there were guest stars who had very familiar faces, including Kathy Bates, Catherine O'Hara, and Patricia Clarkson. The casting for 6 Feet Under is top-notch, with many of the actors performing at their very best. The setting for the series was Los Angeles, and the city was chosen because Alan Ball believed it had a unique outlook on death.
I picked LA because I felt it was kind of like the world capital of the denial of death. And it felt like the juxtaposition of those two things would be really interesting and weird, and I think it was.
One of the unique characteristics of 6 Feet Under was that every episode would open with a death. That death, more often than not, was a complete stranger to the rest of the characters in the series. And each death would have some kind of special resonance for their particular episode. The deaths included were often random or unusual, from the absurdly comic, such as someone being killed by a golf ball, to the tragically realistic, such as someone choking to death and not being discovered until much time later. The opening credits for the series were designed by Digital Kitchen, set to music that had been written by Thomas Newman. The intro had very distinct visual elements that brought to life a show about death. After the lone crow flying across the sky, the image of this tree alone on a hill would be the first thing people would see in the opening credits when tuning into 6 Feet Under for the first time. Debuting on June 3rd, 2001, 6 Feet Under began with the episode titled Pilot. We meet Nathaniel Fisher heading home on Christmas Eve when he's interrupted by a sudden accident. None of these characters quite know how to deal with Nathaniel's death, and in doing so, show us a glimpse into who they are. Ruth is shattered and wrecks the kitchen. David slips back into his professional role to hide from the truth of it. Nate is in shock, and Claire can't fully process it because she's high.
I'm high. I'm crystal. I smoked some with some friends before David called me.
You did what?
I'm really scared.
You cannot do this to me right now.
Claire is looking for some brotherly love and support, but Nate is so lost in his own world he pushes her away. He later makes up for it by taking her shopping with him and offering some comfort, but this moment establishes an important dynamic of the Fisher family. They live their lives apart from one another, and they've been living this way for a long time. One thing a sharp ear will notice is how rich the dialogue is, often filled with foreshadowing. For instance, when Nate is having sex with Brenda at the airport, a woman he just met on his flight, he gets a call on his cell phone.
That's my father looking for me.
At this point in the story, Nathaniel was already dead, but oddly enough, he does find Nate 10 minutes later in another scene. In this moment, Nate is identifying his father's body, and his imagination is getting the best of him.
And you thought you'd escape. Well, guess what? Oh, nobody escapes.
This line has two meanings. Nathaniel is teasing Nate for always having been squeamish around this part of his work as a funeral director. When he says there's no escape, he doesn't just mean from death, but also from the family business Nate will soon find himself pulled into. One of the recurring elements of the pilot are these short little commercials for products used in funeral services. This commodification of death and the grieving process is criticized throughout the episode, most pointedly by Nate.
I went to this island off the coast of Sicily. It's this volcanic island. And when they got that coffin to the beach, those old Sicilian women just went apeshit, screaming, throwing themselves on it, beating their chest, tearing at their hair, making animal noises. It was just so real. I think it's probably so much more healthy than this.
At Nathaniel's funeral, Nate decides to get rid of the dirt shaker to instead get his hands dirty.
David, it's like surgery. Clean, antiseptic. Business.
And Ruth joins him. The image of Ruth in pain, Nate supporting her, and David watching by and doing nothing captures so much their dynamic and serves to reinforce what the show is telling us about the grieving process. That it's something painful to embrace, but necessary, and it shouldn't be papered over. And through that experience, Nathaniel's death isn't a disturbance in their lives where things are upended before returning to normal, but rather a moment of profound change for all the characters. And it begins with Ruth asking Nate to stay.
You don't have to go back to Seattle right away, do you?
I guess not.
Peter Krause described this moment saying, "You can tell in that moment, and it's how Alan directed it, that Nate knows it's not just going to be for a few days. That in the wake of his father's death, his mother's request suddenly is, 'I want you to move here and stay with us.' You see it all in this one great single shot. Her in the foreground, Nate in the background. It's one of my favorite moments of the whole run of the show. I think this moment says so much because while I'm sure Ruth would have liked Nate to be living by well before Nathaniel passed away, the fact that he died and then the intense grieving she did at his funeral, I think gives her the perspective and connection to her grief that motivates her to ask Nate to stay. And going through that process, I think also softens Nate to the idea of staying as well. It shows us that it's not just death that changes people, but the grieving process itself. The episode ends with Nate going for a run, only to see a bus like the one that hit his father, and he's left staring at the faces on the street, almost like he's not there, until they stare back at him. The episode does a lot to establish other plot lines that will run throughout the series, such as the big corporation Kroner that is trying to buy the Fisher & Sons funeral home. We see David trying to keep Keith hidden from his family, unaware that Claire finds him out, and we learn Ruth has been cheating on Nathaniel with her hairdresser.
I'm not fine. I'm a whore. I was unfaithful to your father for years.
But the actual plot of the episode isn't too complicated. It's more focused on introducing the characters because this show will live and die by who these characters are and their relationships. When discussing the pilot, Alan Ball said, "What I do with every pilot I do is I try to open as many doors as possible so that they're there, that you can go through them and do stories in the future should you want. But also, I didn't know this at the time, but I know this now. You can be prepared for all kinds of things about where you think the show is going to go. But once you get it on its feet and you start having actors perform it, and you start filming them and editing them, things will change." Much of the series was shot as written in the pilot, though Ball pointed out a few changes, such as moving the reading of the will that reveals Nate and David are given equal shares of the business to the second episode. A note from HBO suggested that it be less more ambiguous, and it instead lets us spend more time with the characters without being swept entirely into this new dynamic. Ball recounts the reaction to the pilot in an interview. "We shot it, we edited it for a couple of weeks, and I gave it to them on a Friday afternoon. On Monday morning, they called and said, 'We're going to series.' Within a week after the first episode aired, the series was renewed for a second season. The death of Nathaniel forces Nate to reassess where he is in his life, and his summary is grim.
I live in a shitty apartment which was supposed to be temporary. I work at a job which was also supposed to be temporary until I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life, which apparently is nothing. I have lots of sex, but I haven't had a relationship last more than a couple of months. I don't even have the self-discipline to floss daily. I've had 4 root canals. 4. I'm 35. I've had 4 root canals. I'm gonna be one of those losers who ends up in his deathbed saying, where'd my life go?
Nate is a runner, both literally and figuratively. It symbolizes his desire to escape and be free of the responsibilities of his life. It's also not something he can do forever. After he's given half his father's business, Nate at first resists, but then embraces his new life as a funeral director, following in his father's footsteps, something he had been avoiding for most of his life. To push this metaphor a little further, Nate isn't just following his father's footsteps in the family business. Part of Nate's journey is grappling with the reality that, just like his father, one day he too will die, and he needs to make his life matter. Part of Nate's commitment to changing his life is staying with Brenda. Before her, he had had a series of brief encounters with random women, but nothing approaching a serious relationship. Although dating Brenda brings with it a host of special challenges, such as dealing with her volatile brother Billy, Nate tries to make this relationship work. In the final episode of the first season, Brenda and Nate are in a car accident. In the moments leading up to this crash, Nate and Brenda, who had been dating for months at this point, were having a conversation about their future. And she accuses him of wanting to run away from their relationship.
Now we get into what's really going on. You want to bail.
No, you want me to bail.
The crash that follows this argument is an interesting parallel to Nathaniel dying in the first episode of this season, although Nate and Brenda survive. After the accident, we learn something important about Nate, that he has a condition called anteriovenous malformation, or AVM, a condition that might lead to an early death. The doctor has an interesting line when he's breaking the news to Nate.
I would like to run a full cardiovascular profile on you before you continue with the running, okay?
A few scenes later, we see Nate running. The contradictions here are overwhelming. Brenda and Nate very well could have broken up in that moment before the accident, and it might have been Nate running away from something again. But the accident, a brush with death, puts all of that on hold. But when Nate is advised to stop running, since it might hasten a different kind of ending, he ignores that advice and goes for a run anyway. This is one of the great conflicts within Nate. He wants to build a meaningful life for himself, but his actions frequently lead him back to running away from it. You want to root for him because he is trying. As we can see from both the response to his father's death and his near-fatal accident, he can put in an effort. But even when he does try, he still can't help but get in his own way and revert to old patterns. We see this again when he lets his temper get the best of him while speaking to a doctor about options to treat his condition.
Fine, you know what? Just don't do anything, okay? I'm just gonna try and put this all out of my head, no pun intended, and just get on with my life.
I'm not sure, I
I don't give a fuck what you think, you arrogant piece of shit.
Granted, the doctor is acting a bit obnoxiously, but instead perhaps going to a doctor that is less annoying, or perhaps just sucking it up because it is your health on the line, Nate just decides he's going to ignore it and run away from the problem. There's an additional irony that Nate struggles with his own perspective on mortality, but is so much more capable of sympathizing with others.
For a life well lived. That's the most any of us can hope for.
Nate's ability to sabotage his own life through his tendency to run away from it is frequently counterpointed by these moments where he provides comfort to others, as if lending a helpful ear and hearing his own problems coming from someone else's mouth gives him the perspective to help shape his own life, but it still isn't enough to break his old patterns. There's also the irony that Nate seems to get along with strangers better than the people in his own life sometimes. And part of that stems from the fact that Nate, as well as the other Fishers, are incredibly guarded and have difficulty being open and honest with the people around them. A great example of that is Nate and Brenda. After his accident, Nate keeps his diagnosis secret from Brenda, and there's a moment in season 2 where we see them at the beach together, and this imagery becomes a powerful part of Nate's story. The beach is an ecotone, which is a transitionary place between two ecosystems. It's a place between land and water. And in this moment, it's a subtle cue as to where Nate currently exists. His illness has brought him closer to death, but he isn't quite ready to finish living just yet. So he feels trapped between these two spaces. And for Nate, a guy who loves to run, if he decides to do that, eventually there's only going to be one direction to go in. At the end of the episode, Brenda leaves Nate alone with words she means to be about herself, but they could just as easily be about Nate.
We can't fix it.
Nate imagines himself walking into the ocean, and it's a metaphor for his impending death. When that death will happen, he doesn't know, but he now sees himself not as someone standing on firm land, but seated at the beach, wondering when the tide will come to take him. That Nate decides to walk in on his own shouldn't necessarily be read as Nate being suicidal, but him acknowledging the inevitability of what will one day happen, even if he doesn't necessarily want to live in accordance with that knowledge. more than just their individual journeys, this scene also shows us that Brenda and Nate are drifting apart. The rest of the second season shows this relationship slowly deteriorate. Nate hiding his diagnosis from Brenda isn't entirely unnoticed by her. While she isn't aware of what's wrong, she does know that there's something Nate is hiding from her.
I don't know exactly when it changed, but at some point he became less present with me.
This deterioration of Nate and Brenda's relationship accelerates as the secrets and infidelities increase. Eventually, though, it all catches up to them, and Brenda cuts to the quick about why things are falling apart.
Real love? What the fuck did you know
real
about
love,
real
with
love?
the shit and the neediness and the ugliness and the responsibility. You would fucking run, and you know it.
This moment reminds me of a wonderful line about love that Nate heard in the first season. In this particular scene, Mr. Jones, played by Bill Cobbs, is grieving over the recent passing of his wife.
Some pretty little thing catches your eye, and next thing you know, it's been 56 years. And you shit all over yourself in a movie theater, and she's the only one to help you clean it up. That's love.
I think Nate and Brenda have, in the first 2 seasons, a kind of love where they see each other through some very difficult times. Nate lost his father and had a number of other troubles in the first season, and Brenda had her own trials I'll be discussing later. But these moments of giving strength to one another didn't carry with them the openness required to make this relationship last. Nate and Brenda keep too many secrets from one another, and in the case of Nate, I think this fear of openness is something he carries with him after spending over 30 years of running from everything that scares him. As the second season came to an end, after first running from his diagnosis, Nate finally goes into surgery after suffering a seizure. He survives the surgery, and 7 months later we find out Nate is married to Lisa and they are raising their daughter Maya together. Before moving forward, we should take a quick look back at Lisa, played by Lily Taylor. She was a friend of Nate's in Seattle's who was hopelessly in love with him, though he only ever thought of her as a friend. When Nate went to Seattle in the second season to pick up a body, he reconnected with Lisa, and while reconnecting, Lisa ends up pregnant. Lisa would eventually move to Los Angeles to take a job, and now finds herself in Nate's life again. In the episode where Nate visited Lisa in Seattle, Claire has an exchange with Lisa that more or less tells you what you need to know about her relationship with Nate.
I used to think one day he would realize I was the one for him, but he never has. Do you think he ever will?
Nate's treatment of Lisa prior to their marriage is more inferred than seen, though it seems pretty clear that he used her as an emotional dumping ground, going to her when he needed comfort, but never reciprocating the feelings she obviously has for him, feelings he pretended to be unaware of. The companion book for the series, Better Living Through Death, includes several real-world artifacts like letters, chat logs, and other written works that expand on the world of 6 Feet Under. One particularly interesting piece is a letter written by Lisa to Nate. An excerpt from that letter reads, "Remember that time you broke up with Tessa a few days before my birthday 2 years ago? Do you think that was a coincidence? I had just been telling you I was getting a little serious with Foster and that we were planning on going to Burning Man together. It was the first time since we'd been together that I opened myself up to the possibility of someone else, and then suddenly you became available again. When you came into my room that night before I was supposed to leave and we made love, it was so perfect and so right. I felt so close to you then. I knew I couldn't go with Foster, that I'd be rejecting my soul's code if I did. And even though you got back together with Tessa a few days later, I realized that something in you wanted to keep me available so that when you were ready to let love in, I'd be there." This letter was never sent to Nate, but rather this is a writing exercise that Lisa's therapist suggested. It ends with a flurry of anger and resentment, and reveals the complicated feelings she has for Nate. We see some of this rage in the second season of the show when Nate finds out Lisa has moved to Los Angeles, and she finds out that he's engaged to Brenda.
Well, it obviously meant something to you because you were crying like a fucking baby that night.
That's not the reason I was crying,
You
okay?
were crying because you knew you were home, because you missed me, because you know that you and I should be together.
When things go south with Brenda, Nate decides to try and have a family with Lisa, though it becomes very apparent that this isn't going to work.
And I'm really proud of us
For what?
for making this work. For being present, for showing up each day. For being committed to being a family.
Is it that hard for you?
No, of course not.
Well, I thought this was what you wanted.
It is what I want.
If the first season has Nate learning to follow in his father's footsteps, he is now following so closely that it's starting to get disturbing. Nathaniel married Ruth after she became pregnant with Nate, but the similarities between Lisa and Ruth become more pronounced as the season progresses.
You know, in certain ways, Lisa really reminds me of myself.
I'm not you.
You just keep telling yourself that.
Has the party started yet?
Hi, honey. Hello, dear.
I should add that Ruth and Lisa are actually very different people. Ruth is very traditional and conservative in her demeanor, while Lisa is far more open to radical changes and experiences, and not what I would consider traditional or conservative. But the parallel here is how they exist in Nate's life, or I should say in Nate's life and Nathaniel's life. Nate can never really be himself with Lisa, which is ironic because he's living the kind of life he thought he wanted for himself, a stable career, married and with a daughter. He perhaps didn't imagine it looking quite that way and would probably prefer to be married to someone because he wanted to and not because he impregnated her. But it does reflect the maturity he thought he wanted for himself. His time with Lisa sees him becoming someone else, though, increasingly the person she expects him to be.
You made up this story about us, you cast me in this role.
You cast yourself in that role.
But making the mother of my child happy is a role? No smoking, 2 beers a night. No smoking pot without prior written approval.
Smoke your fucking lungs out.
I don't give a shit about smoking, Lisa. I give a shit about being myself.
Just who Nate is a difficult question, and I'm not entirely sure he knows what the answer is. He just knows that he isn't finding happiness with Lisa. As the season moves forward, the two of them try to find some kind of happiness together with limited results, but eventually Lisa decides to spend some time with her sister.
Hey, come on, we'll walk you to the car.
No, I don't want Maya to see me go. I just don't.
Aside from a phone call later in the episode, this is the last time we ever hear from Lisa. The vanishing of Lisa sends Nate into a spiral, lashing out at everyone around him, and there's one moment I want to highlight where he snaps at Ruth.
You know, I had a life. I was ready to go back to Seattle, but no.
I never asked you to...
Oh, yes, you did. Yes, you did. You asked me to stick around. Do I know it's just for a few fucking days, Nate? But that's only because nobody in this fucking family can ever say what they really mean.
So much is made explicit in this moment. Nate's resentment towards Ruth for convincing him to stay, even marrying Lisa, is something that, while she didn't outright demand he do, was certainly something she approved of. And at the very least, it's clear that Ruth liked Lisa way more than she liked Brenda. It would probably be a stretch to say that Ruth was trying to turn Nate into a new version of Nathaniel, but I do believe she enjoyed seeing her son resemble her husband. She believed her son was stepping into a life she is convincing herself was a good one. For Nate, though, walking in the footsteps of his father has only led to misery. He was never happy with Lisa, and his job as a funeral director, in spite of his talent, is starting to eat away at him. Nate may want more for his life, but his mistake was thinking he could find it in the past. An irony is that there's a suggestion in the series that Nathaniel may not have been much happier than Nate. In the first season, we learned that Nathaniel had a secret room where he'd spend time by himself, away from his family, much in the way Nate would spend time driving in his car or finding excuses to stay away from Lisa. Nate's rejection of the past in many ways feels like a rejection of an empty tradition, a life that never really fit him, at least not in the way he needed it to. While it's certainly true he loved Lisa and loves Maya, the image of who he sees himself as and who Lisa wants him to be couldn't be reconciled. It speaks to the powers of these fantasies constructed from an American mythology. The Fishers, as a family, represent an older way of living. Their funeral home is a family business in the age of corporate America. Their upbringing is the conservative rigidity of early American settlers. And even their house seems like something from the past. It was deliberately designed not to evoke a specific era, but to simply be from a long time ago.
It seems to be old in any era. It's not exactly 50s, it's not exactly 40s. It just seems to be something from way back when.
Nate's rejection of a role birthed from the imagination of this tradition isn't entirely a condemnation of it. As we'll see, other characters are much happier in things closer to these traditional family units. Nate has made the mistake of thinking that this tradition should work for him without first figuring out what he truly desires and what parts of that tradition it might resemble. And it demonstrates to us that Nate has spent so much of his life running, he doesn't seem to know where he wants to go. And him running into the arms of Lisa and this ready-made family was not the happiness he was looking for. At the end of the third season, Nate learns that Lisa has died when her body is discovered, and he's left with a unique kind of guilt.
What would it mean to lose somebody who you kind of secretly wanted to lose anyway?
This is perhaps most clearly seen in this moment in the first episode of the fourth season.
I couldn't believe how much time I wasted thinking, please don't let it be me that fucks it up.
And it wasn't.
No. Good for me.
Nate works through his grief and guilt at the same time, stepping away from his job as a funeral director and hooking up with random women. It all looks like a numbing process, blocking memories of the life he was trying to build with Lisa, aside from his unwavering affection for Maya. Over time, he slowly begins to reassemble himself, and he drifts back towards Brenda. His retreat to Brenda is done out of a need for a familiar comfort, more so than any attempt to replace Lisa in his family. At first, he actually resists the idea of Brenda being a part of his life with Maya, though gradually he warms to the idea. This sets Nate up for the rest of the series as we see him try to build a new family, this time with a woman he's chosen rather than one he feels obliged to be with, although it doesn't work out so simply. Nate's relationship with Brenda fell apart because of the secrets they kept from one another, leading to their respective infidelities. But their new dynamic, where they promise to be more open, isn't quite the fix they need it to be. Just to briefly explain some of Nate's concerns, by the end of season 4, it becomes apparent that some foul play was involved with Lisa's death, and Nate discovers that Lisa had been sleeping with her brother-in-law, Hoyt. Although the series doesn't confirm it explicitly, it's heavily implied that Hoyt was the one who murdered her, but he kills himself before he admits to having done anything other than being with her the night she went missing. Nate's reaction to the whole situation is to try and move forward with Brenda, starting a new family together. Though after a few years where he lost his father, was in a car accident, nearly died in an operation, got married, had his wife go missing, and then find out she was murdered, he is not in the most stable of places, and is very wary of anything upheaving what little stability he's found in his life. Nate and Brenda are never able to capture the experience of their early relationship again. Nate has changed too much since, and the same can be said about Brenda. And the memory of their love isn't a substitute for a new one in the present. The closest either of them come to a lasting loving relationship, at least in their recent history, is what they found in the first season. By the 5th season, they've ended up together, only we realize that there is no going back, even if they do get married. This is expressed ironically by Carol, who was Lisa's boss when she moved to Los Angeles. She delivered this line in Nate and Lisa's wedding video, which is being viewed in the first episode of the 5th season.
I love how weddings just erase the past, like a coat of white primer.
It's very clear that much in the way Nate and Brenda's relationship fell apart the first time because they weren't in the same place, they once again aren't on the same wavelength. It becomes clear right away that Nate perhaps isn't quite as ready to have a new child with Brenda.
You pregnant?
Yes.
Well, that's great. Congratulations.
Congratulations to whom?
Come on, what am I supposed to say?
Nothing.
The deterioration of their marriage is slow and predictable, and the 5th season is filled with foreshadowing of something even more catastrophic. In the 2nd episode of the 5th season, Nate's friend Sam Hoviak passes away as the episode's opening death. And we see in the 6th episode, the woman Nate lost his virginity to, Fiona Kleinschmidt, also passes away. And in the 4th episode, while celebrating Nate's 40th birthday, a bird is found inside his house, symbolizing an impending death. On the subject of this bird, I also need to correct the episode's director, Alan Poole, when he says this.
And there was Midori, the trained blue jay.
Contrary to the DVD audio commentary for this episode, this is not a trained blue jay, but rather a black-throated magpie jay. Just thought I needed to set the record straight for that. The arrival of Maggie into the series, played by Tina Holmes, is another sign of the end. But when Nate cheats on Brenda with her, it's not his marriage it signifies the end of.
Arm.
Nate!
Nate's stroke sends him into a coma. And though he wakes up briefly to end things with Brenda, he doesn't last much longer. Nate dies at the end of the 9th episode of the 5th season as he shares a dream with David.
Come on, bro, you and me!
There could be sharks!
Why don't you join him?
Why don't you join him?
Nate's death interrupts the interruptions in his life and provides perspective on how unknowable what we think about change truly is. We have no idea how things would have worked out in the future with Nate, Maggie, and Brenda. You might have assumed that Nate would get divorced from Brenda and he could finally find peace that he was looking for with Maggie. But do we really know things would have worked out between them? His affection for her seemed to be based on what she represented rather than who she was. He saw her as this peaceful, idyllic person, but could she really be that all the time? And what happens when he starts learning that there's parts of her that aren't quite so ideal? I'm not sure we as an audience really got to know Maggie well enough to know how happy she would have been with Nate. And if there's one thing we've learned about Nate is that him constantly running from one solution to another doesn't seem to solve his problems. Although Nate's death is heavily foreshadowed in the season and really throughout the series, what I appreciate is that the story doesn't build itself around that death. Nate's death is not a capstone on this story, rather it throws it all into upheaval one more time. Nate's death 3 episodes before the finale only emphasizes this because we now have to sit with these characters through their grief and watch their lives slowly resume, never really getting closure on Nate's story, and that perhaps is one of the truest lessons in the series. Nathaniel's death at the beginning of the series presented Nate with the realization that his life needed to change, but there is no clean line from that moment to who Nate was when he died. Arguably, he was running away from his marriage with Brenda, though considering the state of it, maybe that was the right move, and perhaps they shouldn't have gotten married to begin with. So even his act of running, as detrimental as it seemed to be, can't be understood universally as a bad thing. It needs to be considered under the context of how and why. That Nathaniel's death put that part of his personality into sharp focus doesn't carry with it such a clean and easy answer. I think if anything we can learn from Nate's life is that he reacted to his father's death by trying to change his life, even if that statement is a bit simplistic and reductive, because those attempts to change included disasters like both his marriages, but it also did include some good, like creating Maya, and his time as a funeral director genuinely helped people through their grief. Nate's life is ultimately a scattered mess, drifting from woman to woman and never committing to any kind of a career. What we can take from it is not the specific choices he made, but rather the ethos of trying to change his life, to go from a complacency of his time in Seattle to a more active person that he became in Los Angeles. That he often failed makes him more relatable and serves as a reminder that we might fail too, but that doesn't absolve someone from trying. Because sooner or later, we all end up the same way Nate did. And even though his death was sudden and unexpected, at least in the years leading up to it, he was trying to make a life for himself that he would be happy with. When we first meet Brenda in the pilot, we don't really know who she is, aside from being a source of comfort for Nate. But there are small hints that there's more to her than we first see. For instance, she's rather clear-eyed about her sexual encounter with Nate.
We both just fucked a perfect stranger. And we both lied when we said we never did that.
We also briefly meet her brother, Billy. One of the real difficulties in finding Brenda's character is that she is frequently limited by what she can do in her life. And her growth throughout the season is her claiming space for her own wants and desires. Here's a moment she shares with Nate in the first season.
I'm not that guy with you.
Who are you?
I don't know, somebody new.
It's because of your father. You were with me at your most vulnerable. You felt comfortable.
Brenda sees right through this declaration. It's not that she is some magic force here to transform him, but rather she understands he is going through a journey where his mind is trying to recontextualize his surroundings, and Brenda is a convenient new thing to help. Brenda's ability to analyze Nate comes from her unusually high intelligence, so much so that she was studied as a child, and she was raised by parents who were psychiatrists who brought up their children in an unconventional way. That, coupled with having a brother like Billy, has given Brenda what is almost certainly the most chaotic childhood of any character on the show. Now, as an adult, she works as a shiatsu massage therapist with no specific goal or direction in her life. Rachel Griffiths described Brenda in an interview saying, "You know, Nate's the guy and she's the girlfriend, and you use the girlfriend to explore different things about your main character. But with Alan's women, he made them all 100% their own people who would intersect with other people. They were not subservient."
That is really starting to piss me off.
Well, I'm sorry I'm not some well-behaved little nothing that never challenges you, but if that's what you're looking for, you might as well just leave right now.
From Brenda's perspective, there's a real fear that Nate will abandon her, in part because she acutely notices that he has a tendency to run from things, but also because Brenda seems to have given into the idea that her upbringing has trapped her into a life she can never improve upon. Part of that life includes caring for her brother Billy.
She's my sister. She's my mother. Sister. My mother. Oh, sorry. Nobody's ever laughed at that. I should know better.
Billy suffers from bipolar disorder and often has very intense emotional reactions when he's off his medication. His dependency on Brenda has made him possessive, keeping her from pursuing her academic career or having a stable relationship. But through dating Nate and becoming closer to him than she had with men in her past, things come to enough of a head that it's finally clear to Brenda that Billy needs the kind of help that doesn't come from a sister sacrificing her life for him. In this scene, Billy has cut off one of his tattoos. It was a set that he and Brenda got together, and now he wants to remove hers as well.
Well, this way you'll be safe from her too for like the first time ever, and then we can bury them and you and I can be new people.
Billy is placed in a mental health facility, and for the first time in her adult life, Brenda is given the opportunity to decide what she wants to be, without worrying that she'll be called away from her life to help her ailing brother. But the problem is, much like Nate, the opportunity to change doesn't bring with it a transformation that separates a before and after period in one's life. Rather, Brenda is stepping into this new life while being weighed down by her own history.
You think I'm depressed?
Are you?
Yeah.
We can learn a lot from Brenda at this point in her story. What seemed like a moment of liberation instead hits her with a bout of depression. As much as she may have been trapped by Billy, she also loved him, as her brother was the only one who could empathize with her childhood being raised like a science experiment.
I spent my childhood performing for clinicians, the rest of my life taking care of my train wreck of a brother, and I have no idea who I am.
In that struggle, Brenda is left alone. She doesn't have her brother anymore, and every attempt to talk to her parents leaves her frustrated. And with Nate suddenly closed off from her as he's hiding his diagnosis, she falls back into a familiar pattern, hooking up with random guys. In the second season, Brenda befriends a prostitute named Melissa, played by Kelly Waymeyer. Melissa more or less serves as a sounding board for Brenda. When Brenda reconsiders her actions, finally realizing how hurtful they are to Nate, she rejects Melissa and blames her friend for her own behavior.
You know, if I hadn't met you, I probably wouldn't have been doing all the shit I've been doing. Not that I blame you exactly.
Oh, brother. Just can it, sweetheart. You can't stand to see the truth about yourself, so I've got to take the fall.
Melissa as a character only exists to provide insight into Brenda as a character this season, which reflects just how isolated she was in the series. The show has to invent an entire character for her to have someone to talk to, so we could have scenes where we get some insights into why she's behaving so erratically, and how she justifies it to herself. Unfortunately, the character of Melissa never returns to the show after the actor who played her, Kelly Waymeyer, passed away the following year, so she never got the chance to be a more developed character. When the truth about Brenda's infidelity comes out, she and Nate split up, and their breakup now has a different dimension when you look at it from her perspective.
The only reason you stay with me is because I was never really here.
Brenda spent much of the season feeling alone and lost, trying to find herself without anyone there to help her, including Nate, who was busy with his own problems. It doesn't make what she did right, but it does provide important context to explain why she and Nate drifted apart. The two of them were leading lives that interjected into what they were trying to build between them, and their poor choices, driven by fear and uncertainty, creates a division that can't be overcome. As Nate goes into surgery, we see Brenda deciding to leave, to deal with her sex addiction and perhaps find a route to a new life. After Nate's adventure with Lisa, he ends up with Brenda, and as I've already described, it doesn't go well for them. But I want to expand a bit more on Brenda's journey, because while Nate struggles to find a life that satisfies him, Brenda's path takes a different direction. In the fourth season, we saw Brenda make two major changes to her life. She decided to go back to school to study to become a psychiatrist, and she decided she wanted a family. Funnily enough, like Nate, Brenda is also following in the footsteps of her parents, though it's not quite the same as inheriting the family business. Watching Brenda go through school, you get a real sense that she wants to make a positive impact in people's lives.
Then what is the point of continuing his therapy?
Well, maybe it's the one thing that keeps him from jumping off a bridge.
I think we can do better than that.
From watching Billy to wanting a child to wanting to provide psychiatric care for people, we really get a sense of Brenda as a caregiver, providing the love and security she never got when she was younger. Her path to becoming a mental health professional isn't linear, of course, as she experiences dangerous patients and a limit to her empathy for people from poor communities. It's a classic 6 feet under move for characters to never find their way to a better life so easily. Aside from her relationship with Nate, Brenda's life starts to come together surprisingly well. Something interesting was happening with how the character was being perceived by the audience too. During the second season in particular, Brenda was not very popular, in part because women who cheat on their men are often judged very harshly, and also because her reasons for doing it weren't particularly good, and she did do it a lot. But by the time the later seasons rolled around, people started seeing Brenda differently. In an interview, Alan Ball described it saying, "People despised Brenda during the second season, and now everybody says, 'Oh, poor Brenda,' all in such a short period. And I think, you know what? That's like life. I have relatives who once said, 'Oh, your uncle blah blah treats your aunt this horrible way, and she's really suffering.' And then 3 years later, it's like, she was crazy." It's funny how perceptions change, and perceptions have so much to do with what our idea of reality is. I think Brenda getting her life together and being given the opportunity to show a side of herself that isn't her spiraling into despair made her a more appealing character, and having an arc that does feel a little inspiring certainly helps too. Of course, that should be tempered with the fact that she came from a very privileged background and certainly used those connections to get a cushy internship And being unusually intelligent certainly helped as well. But considering where she came from and where she ended up, it's quite a transformation. It's hard not to contrast her with Nate, who we see unraveling for far longer and never quite figuring out how to get himself to a place where he can ever find happiness, as he runs from one destination to the next. And his death forever keeps him from finding the happy life he wants. And when Nate's death happens in the series, it's like a bomb going off in everyone's stories, Brenda's in particular. She felt like her marriage was coming to an end after finding out he had cheated on her, and now having died, she's unable to process how to deal with her new reality. Another sudden change forces Brenda to consider her future when she goes into labor. Maya is something of a legacy left to Brenda, and when Nate dies, Brenda has to raise her along with the child she and Nate were going to have. This child is named Willa. The birth of Willa is a fascinating counterpoint to the death of Nate, because much like death, a birth can catch you off guard. Although, to be fair, anyone expecting a baby probably has a good idea one is coming. Although in the case of Willa, Brenda is going into labor early, making it especially surprising. In spite of some difficulties with the delivery, baby Willa does pull through and serves as a reminder for Brenda, and us, that the unexpected doesn't mean disaster. And while Nate's departure threw her life into chaos, she's proven she knows how to claw her way back from the brink. In an interview with Michael C. Hall, he described David saying,
"The guy's not incidentally gay. He's not he's not like the understanding neighbor upstairs with the little dog. He's not a lampoon. He's like a real person with a real relationship."
David's arc, at least in the first season, was an exploration of his internalized homophobia.
How it's going to play itself out in, dangerous behavior and risk-taking and what are the hurdles this guy has to get over before he can just be comfortable being himself and being in a relationship with another man.
David was able to explore those issues with a degree of complexity and nuance not typically afforded gay characters in 2001. Being part of a society that was somewhat warming up to the idea that gay people existed, and his own personal difficulties with being open about who he is, especially having grown up in a family where openness was rarely practiced. David's faith is a big part of his character, particularly in the first season. At the beginning of the series, we find out he regularly attends a progressive church with Keith, though following his father's death, he returns to his family's more conservative Episcopalian church, so Ruth won't have to go alone.
Well, I hope you always feel as welcome here as you did there.
Thanks.
Father Jack, played by Tim McEwen, invites David to be a deacon at the church, which he accepts, though it means he and Keith can't go to their church together anymore. What's so fascinating about David's journey with his faith is that it delves into the real struggle a certain type of gay Christian would have, caught between their homophobic religious upbringing and a different progressive version of Christianity that accepts him for who he is. David's time as a deacon brings this into sharper focus when a new priest is interviewed, seeming to have more progressive politics.
Religion is politics, David. Jesus was a revolutionary. Threatened those in power, and they had him assassinated. And they do the same thing to him today.
David's faith is something sincere, but also practical rather than an affectation. It actually matters to him and enriches his life. It gives him a sanctuary. This new priest presents a chance for David to actually change the church of his family into one that might be more accepting of him. Ultimately, though, David, as the deciding vote, decides it's more important to uphold the conservative tradition of the church rather than push for some kind of radical change.
And the one thing that helps me to deal with it is having a place that hasn't changed like everything else in my life. There's a reason they call it a sanctuary.
Towards the end of the season, a young man named Marcus Foster is killed in a hate crime, and his service is held at Fisher & Sons. David imagines Marcus ghost talking to him, forcing David to confront the complex nature of his identity as a gay man and his Christian faith.
God challenges us like this, so we'll choose good. So we'll triumph over evil. Only thing is, so few of us do.
It's not a choice. God already made the choice for you.
That's just liberal propaganda to justify your own depravity.
Later, he speaks about it with Keith.
But you know that you're right, that you're a good man. For me, it's like I agree with them, Like it is my fault, and I should be able to fix it. There's nothing to fix, but it's not who I want to be.
David, fearing that him being gay is some kind of choice or perhaps simply an absence of faith, is about his struggle about what it means to express this faith publicly and whether or not it's genuine. He knows that there are churches that will accept him for who he is, but it's a fact that these aren't the churches he was raised in, and those churches he was raised in were the origin of his faith, creating doubt in his mind on which version of Christianity is the right one, or the truer one. And he fears that he's deluding himself into thinking the progressive version of Christianity is anything more than a delusion to help avoid that doubt in what his faith means. Ultimately, David is a very traditional guy, and he wants a traditional life with a family, but he doesn't see how that's possible as a gay man. The fear he has of his family, his father in particular, not accepting him leaves a long shadow on his life. The death of Nathaniel effectively means he can never be accepted by them, at least not openly, although later he would suspect that Nathaniel might have known he was gay. David sees the church as something similar, and it occupies a similar space in his mind, a constant, unchanging thing, and he neglects to understand that a church is a community of people, one he can try to be a part of, and that by trying to be a part of it, he's doing far more for his own happiness than letting himself be trapped by the frozen dread he locks himself within. Throughout the first season, David's sexuality is revealed to all of his family members in a variety of ways. Claire notices him with Keith during Nathaniel's funeral. Nate catches them at brunch, and David more or less comes out, and Ruth finds out accidentally from a temporary employee. Ruth does find out a few episodes later from David himself. What's remarkable about these moments is how non-eventful they really are. His family is generally pretty okay with it, aside from Ruth, who's not upset about him being gay, but more frustrated that he didn't tell her. Also, this is a classic 6 Feet Under moment that goes from very sweet to bitter.
I've always loved you.
I know you love the part of me that's your son.
What part of you isn't my son? You're all my son.
I don't think you know me very well.
Well, whose fault is that? I'm sorry.
The only person who has any issue with David being gay is Rico.
If men need to do that sometimes, they don't talk about it. They don't leave their wife and kids. They're still men.
I am a man.
Over time, Rico does come around and accept David for who he is. By coming out to his family and providing service to Marcus's family after he's murdered, David is learning to reconcile his faith and his life as a gay man, realizing that he doesn't need to hide and that he isn't a passive member in his community, but an active participant. And he has as much a right to try and influence it as anyone else. It culminates with him delivering a speech at his family's church where he asserts who he is.
I've been ashamed my entire life. I grew up thinking I was unworthy in the eyes of God instead of trusting God. How am I supposed to spread God's love throughout the world when I deny it to myself?
It's a powerful moment for David, even though he ultimately is forced out of his position as deacon. In spite of that, he imagines Marcus, now healed, thanking him, though it's certainly David thanking himself for embracing this truer version of who he is. Even if it doesn't change the world, it can at least change some of the world around David. Also, as a quick note about the production of this episode, there's a moment where David is sitting in church after he delivers his speech and he sees this weird stained glass window. This was actually not part of the script, and it was something they found on location and is 100% a thing someone made to be displayed in a church.
This window actually existed in the church, and when I saw it, I just thought, we have to use that. We got to get a shot of that.
I haven't mentioned Keith much so far, largely because in the first season, Keith doesn't have too much going on. He encourages David to be more courageous and open about who he is, and when David continues to struggle to do that, they split up, though they would get back together in season 2. On the road to that reconciliation, we start to get a better sense of who Keith is as a character. We learn more about Keith's family, including his sister Carla, who's suffering from addiction, and their homophobic father. As a cop, Keith is involved in a shooting and then an assault that costs him his job. A lot of stuff is happening to this guy, but I want to focus on Keith's temper, which seems to be the overriding topic for him in these earlier episodes. It's something he learned from his father, but is also an understandable response to this trying time in his life. Not that I'm trying to excuse his behavior, but rather to demonstrate how this series is multifaceted in its approach of explaining where these character flaws come from. David often finds himself walking on eggshells to avoid Keith's fury after they move in together.
You scare me.
Shut the fuck up.
You want everything to be perfect. All the time.
This later turns into a literal fight, and then they have sex. In spite of all this strife, and thanks to some therapy, David and Keith manage to make things work between them.
You know, I grew up in a family where people express their anger on a regular basis. So that's what intimacy feels like to me. But you, I mean, you grew up in a family where no one ever expressed anything.
Yeah, we also never hit each other.
David and Keith, like every couple on this show, encounter problems, though they seem to be better when it comes to dealing with those problems. I once heard some advice that the couples that last are not the ones that avoid having problems, but rather the ones that deal with those problems. David's shame and Keith's temper present challenges, and there is certainly avoidance involved at various periods in their relationship, but David and Keith decide that them being together is something worth working for, and they often confront these problems together. And each time they do, the bond between them gets stronger. At various times, they served as an emotional foundation for one another. When David ran into trouble with the law, Keith showed up to support him. And when Keith was struggling with his sister, David was there to support him in turn. And this happened while they were split up. They were just demonstrating this care and concern they have for one another. In future seasons, they would navigate numerous other challenges, but I think the core of their commitment is that ability to be there for one another in their hardest moment. In a sense, to act as the emotional rock each one needs in a moment of crisis. This brings us to one of the more controversial episodes in the series, That's My Dog, the 5th episode of the 4th season. While the first half more or less plays like any other episode of 6 Feet Under, it takes a dark turn when a hitchhiker David has picked up does something unexpected.
Hey. Okay, this is the deal. We walk in there, you get as much cash as you can with your ATM card.
From here, the episode stays with David for the remaining 20 minutes as we see him traumatized while this guy takes him on a terrifying tour that involves drugs, a gun, and other life-threatening experiences. It ends with David having gasoline poured on him and having a gun put in his mouth. Thankfully, though, he survives the experience. The DVD commentary for this episode from director Alan Poole highlights how this show, by breaking its rules and focusing exclusively on one character, was an effort to make people think that David might die.
This needed to be brutal because at the end, as part of the original design, we wanted to get people to the place where, at the end and only at the end, they could believe that we might actually be willing to end the life of one of our series protagonists. Because we're in David's shoes for most of this ride. We're on the ride with David, and David believes it.
6 Feet Under has many dark moments within it, but this episode in particular is so extreme that there was a strong reaction from the audience, in part because a social contract of sorts was broken in this episode. One article describing this episode said, "Perhaps part of the problem is that 6 Feet Under is itself about grief. Mild shock is built into the series, with its opening death of the week. But a lengthy real-time ordeal like David's carjacking feels like a betrayal in a show we've watched for many years. A movie, no matter how startling, is over in 2 hours and you go home. With TV, we're committed. It's a relationship, one that allows us to invite these characters into our bedrooms. Although the aftermath would be felt most keenly in the following episode, this experience would stay with David for the rest of the series. It's the sort of trauma that leaves a long, deep scar." Going back to David and Keith's relationship, I think this also shows us how, from the perspective of the show, it's hard for Keith to escape the shadow of David's larger storylines. His dissatisfaction with his job and security and the drama of working for a celebrity, which is what Keith was up to in season 4, is immediately interrupted by David's traumatic experience. And this felt like a recurring theme with these two characters. Keith's anger issues, which I highlighted earlier, felt especially pronounced, I suspect, because they directly impacted David. As he tries to recover from the assault and robbery, David urges Keith to go back to work, clearly in denial about the lasting impact of the trauma he's under. It's here we get a look at the support system David has when, after telling Claire the full extent of what happened to him, which David had kept secret from everyone but Keith, Claire convinces Nate to come back to the funeral home to support David.
He would do it for you.
I think this is one of the sweetest moments in the series. At this point in time, Nate is trying to move on from the tragedy of Lisa's death and get away from the job that is draining him of life. But he goes back for the brother who needs him, and the importance of Claire connecting them shows how all three of these siblings have to watch out for one another. A far cry from the barriers they had up between them when the series first began. It's hard to imagine a moment like this happening for Keith in the series, in part because his family aren't really central characters in the story, so the show simply isn't set up to give him that kind of a moment. And I think this is another way in which David often overshadows his partner. The 5th season saw David and Keith dive headfirst into the world of parenthood. This was something foreshadowed throughout the series, such as when they had to take care of Keith's niece, Taylor, or when David's imagination got the best of him.
It's a Chinese baby.
What's it doing in the cupboard?
Someone must have left her here for us.
Who?
I don't know. Someone Chinese.
After some drama with surrogates and adoption, they end up adopting 2 boys, Darrell and Anthony, played by Kendra Barry and CJ Sanders, respectively. Although it's rough going for a few episodes, they learn the power of listening to their kids and asking them how to make things better, and the situation improves.
I was thinking we'd go on vacation. Go down to Mexico. Go swimming in the ocean.
But who's gonna take care of us?
You're coming with us.
When the series began, David and Keith were in such dramatically different places and have evolved into this functioning family unit, one that demonstrates not just growth, but a fulfillment of their dreams, and the huge amount of work it took to get there. Before Nate went into surgery in season 2, he has a close moment with David.
Wish you could come with me.
Okay, I'm not going to Claire's graduation. Mom's insane.
No, you go to the graduation. That's not what I meant.
When Nate dies in the final season, I was reminded of that moment. I haven't spent too much time talking about how their relationship changed throughout the series. There was initially a bitterness between them, mostly on David's side, but that faded in the first season, and through the rest of the series, they're 2 close brothers. But as David sits next to Nate in his final moments, the 2 share this dream where they go to the beach together, only for David to watch Nate walk into the ocean.
Why don't you join him? Why don't you join him?
The experience re-traumatizes David, and he relapses into the person he was following his abduction. The connections here are a bit murky, but make a kind of sense that can be intuited. A new traumatic experience triggering an older one. And the vision David sees mixing his attacker and himself together speaks to the erratic nature of our thoughts and the messiness that this series loves to dwell in. What ties it together is what often gets referred to by people who worked on the show as an emotional truth. David's journey, and really the journey of all the characters, are deeply tied to these emotional truths. David's shame from his religious upbringing and his fear as a response to Keith's temper, and later his own trauma. Overcoming those demons is what his story is. Understanding that the challenge comes not just from the outside world, which poses real problems and dangers, but also the way he internalizes them and thinks of them, learning how to create emotional strength and resiliency. In this section, I had hoped to speak more on Keith, and I think I did some justice to his character, but he is so inextricably linked to David, who seems so much more pronounced in his connection to other characters on the show, that I think Keith suffers as a character. For all the work to build him up in season 2, he still often felt like a supporting player in David's drama. There's an interesting moment in season 1 where David and Keith are fighting, and Keith is pushing David to confront his own feelings of loyalty to a church that despises him. David hits back pretty hard.
So now I'm a Nazi collaborator? You know, a lot of African Americans might say the same thing about you being a member of the LAPD.
That's a heck of a line to throw out there and then never follow up on once in the series. Similarly, when Keith is cleared for shooting a man as a police officer, there's no real interest in examining how police violence is considered justifiable. There is, I suppose, some subtext there, but I think Keith's story might have been more compelling if that had become part of it, or perhaps something else entirely. I'm not saying this show should have focused on specific types of stories, just that Keith's stories tended to be less compelling when compared to David's. Although David often treats Keith as his emotional rock, within the narrative, David seems more like Keith's rock, ensuring he continues to have a prominent place in this story. Upon first meeting Ruth, we soon find out she is a very passionate woman.
Your father did so many wonderful things for you, and that's all you can think of right now. God, I just remembered it. He was a good man!
Following the passing of Nathaniel, Ruth is the most lost of the Fishers. Alan Ball explained it, saying,
Ruth is a woman who at a very, at a later point in her life, suddenly no longer has the structure that gave her life meaning up until that point.
Frances Conroy said of the character, she's so confused at the start from so many things. You have somebody in your life you're taking care of, and everybody starts growing, and you don't necessarily understand one another for stretches of time, and that's hard to deal with. As time goes by, she's finding things that she loves, finding things to love in herself, and finding ways to love those around her in a different way. Ruth's first steps into rediscovering herself involve a series of romantic affairs. First with Hiram, the hairdresser she was cheating on Nathaniel with, played by Ed Begley Jr., and then Nikolai, the florist who supplies the funeral home, played by Edo Ross.
I can't have you skulking around with that look in your eye.
What look?
That sex look.
Maybe you like it.
Going from dutiful wife to playing the field suggests that Ruth depends quite deeply on having a man in her life, though this is probably a bit too simplistic. Ruth was with Hiram while Nathaniel was still alive, and her attraction to Nikolai shows us that it isn't about becoming someone's significant other, but rather a desire for physical affection. 6 Feet Under is a show with a lot of sex in it, and that includes Ruth. The show doesn't embrace the route of most other media where sex only belongs to the young people so everyone can ogle at them, but rather sex is a part of everyone's life, including Ruth. By not giving it special treatment, it ironically makes the show feel special.
I've invited Nikolai to dinner Sunday night. I'd like you all to be there.
Nikolai, the flower guy?
Yes, he and I are having a sexual relationship now. I'm not sure if it's something that's going to last, but, well, there it is.
After embracing her more sensual side, Ruth's journey of rediscovering herself reveals a sad truth, that she's incredibly lonely. In season 2, after a woman chokes to death and is only discovered sometime later, her prepaid funeral service is held at Fisher & Sons, and no one attends. No one aside from Ruth.
Father Jack is on his way here right now. Just give me 10 minutes.
Well, for what?
After marshaling Father Jack, Rico, and the rest of her family, they hold a service to remember this woman no one else seemed to. The service offered Emily at the end was very sweet, for strangers to come together as a community and acknowledge someone's passing. It doesn't have to be a personal connection, but she was another person deserving of that same kind of recognition. It's a nice statement that people would choose to remember that we are all part of a shared community.
All I want is for us not to be strangers. Won't any of you have intimacy with me? Okay. I guess I have my answer.
There are many ways to feel lonely, even with her family around her, and even with a series of romantic interests. Ruth is still a lonely person.
Her life, she's trying to keep so ordered, and we see her making everything just so, and this plate of Brussels sprouts in a line and potatoes in a line. And she's trying to make a life for herself, but it's so sad because she's by herself.
In the 3rd season, Ruth befriends Bettina, which provides her with some of the companionship she had been desperately needing. But far less conventional is her brief relationship with Arthur, an intern who works at Fisher & Sons while occupying one of the rooms in the Fisher home.
Second drawer sticks unless you lift as you pull.
Thank you.
It's a strange combination of their shared old-fashioned values as well as Arthur's upbringing and Ruth's loneliness, creating this impression that they make a kind of romantic sense, but it's still very strange.
Please, don't kiss me again.
I never will, never.
Friends.
Friends.
Ruth sees Arthur almost like a boy that needs to be cared for, something that becomes a recurring pattern in her relationships. With Nikolai, he had had his legs broken by mobsters. Ruth stepped in to care for him. Her caring for him became so intense it eventually split them up after she paid off his debt to the mob. With Arthur, she cares for him like a mother, and ultimately she has to end that because she wants a lover more than another child. In her eventual relationship with George, she once again becomes a caregiver, this time looking after a man who has a severe mental health disorder.
Even if it's true, I can't give up. No. No, I won't.
Having rushed into a marriage, Ruth feels obliged to care for George, and she soon finds herself unable to keep up with him while he's having one of his breaks from reality. Though making things worse is Ruth falling into her own depressive state. Ruth has spent so much of her life caring for others, starting from spending her youth taking care of her grandmother who lost her legs, to caring for her children, to caring for Nathaniel, to caring for Nikolai, and even to caring for Maya. We see her throughout the series providing care for people, sometimes quite happily, sometimes miserably, but always with this sense of duty. There's this line in the final episode that I think captures Ruth very well.
If my experience is anything to go by, motherhood is the loneliest thing in the world.
While Ruth loves her children and doesn't regret the life she dedicated to raising them, it certainly contributed to her loneliness. And it entrenches this pattern that was drilled into her from a young age, that it was her job to care for people. Ruth's role as a caregiver is how she defines herself, and it's part of herself that she's trying to grow out of. That she keeps falling back into that pattern is an expression of how deeply rooted in her psyche that way of being is buried. When she feels trapped taking care of George, she has an outburst.
Get you some help, a nurse or something.
No, I'm still the one who has to be there all day and every night.
But why do you think?
Because there's no one else!
It's not just that Ruth sees herself as the only one to care for George, it's also her frustration at only being able to see herself as that caregiver, and not a person who can exist for herself rather than in the service of others. I have a lot of sympathy for Ruth, as her struggle seems like the fate of any woman who grew up the way she did, as it was certainly expected for a daughter in her family to be a caregiver, unlike her rebellious sister Sarah. But I also need to mention Ruth's own myopia and how it can hurt those around her, including the people she's supposed to be caring for. There is a stretch of episodes where George seems to be in particularly bad shape psychologically. He receives electroconvulsive therapy, and because of that, starts to slowly improve. But Ruth's own self-pity makes it difficult for her to acknowledge that, and that both frustrates George and affects his recovery. George has this interesting moment at a party in season 5 when he's talking to Billy, the other character facing particularly acute mental health challenges in the series.
Every day, in every way, I am getting better and better. But not everyone agrees.
Yeah, it's hard to get your shit together with someone watching all the time.
It's a rare moment where we see two people not really connected by anything other than both being neuroatypical, expressing frustration with how their behaviors are examined under a microscope, like their lives need to be constantly monitored, and that this is the bargain they need to make to be a part of society. It doesn't seem very conducive to good mental health. Ruth and George eventually split up. When Nate dies, a caregiver like Ruth is ironically completely unavailable to be by his side in his final moments. She had recently gone camping after briefly getting back together with Hiram, but then wandered off on her own and had a daydream where she imagined shooting all of the men she's been involved with romantically.
I care for you. Let's rub heads.
Feeling guilty for not having been there, she compensates by trying to be the one who steps in to take care of Maya, even though at this point, Brenda had been raising her alongside Nate, and Maya very much sees Brenda as her mother. Ruth's state of mind is described by her imaginary version of Nate.
Before Claire, before David, it was just Dad and you and me, and everything was going to be all right.
This moment reminded me of another in the finale of season 2. Nate is about to undergo his operation for his AVM, and Ruth is feeling frustrated that she was the last one to know about his condition.
I just didn't want to worry you.
You're not supposed to protect me. I'm supposed to protect you.
But you can't.
Nate was trying to spare Ruth's feelings, but in a flash, their roles are reversed.
You're everything to me.
God, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I can't do this. I can't. I don't want to go.
I won't let you go. I'll never let you go.
In that moment, Ruth seems like a different person, and I imagine this is who she was when they were all younger, and Nate needed his mother to take care of him. It's a place where she felt some amount of power and control, and also a deep love, both for and from the boy in her arms. But after Nathaniel's death, learning that Nate might die, and then him later actually dying, Ruth loses all of that. The things that helped her feel like she had some control over her life. And those were some moments where she was genuinely happy, maybe the happiest she's ever been. This is something that the Fishers all deal with, constantly controlling their emotions and internal selves. But Ruth in particular not only controlled herself, but also the family as its matriarch. To lose that role is to lose herself, and in her journey to rediscover herself, it frequently returns. This old vision of the past is something she wishes she could go back to. Maya was her last chance to be that person one more time, to be the matriarch for her granddaughter. But when Brenda's water breaks, Ruth has to spring into action and help get her to the hospital. And with the birth of Willa, she sees that not only is death not the only thing that changes your world, but so does the beginning of a new life, embracing new possibilities. And Ruth still has plenty of years ahead of her to find a new way to live that life. Rico is the character least connected to the Fisher family. Unlike Brenda and Keith, he's not romantically involved with the family, but rather works for them. Alan Ball described him saying,
"If it was in Shakespearean terms, that
Rico was sort of like the bastard son who was fighting for his share of what was rightfully his.
In an interview, Freddie Rodriguez said, "There's this poster, I think for season 3, where the family is sitting at the kitchen table and I'm sitting on the kitchen counter looking in on them. I remember Alan saying to me, that pretty much sums up your role in the family. And that was really how it felt for the most part." After Rico's father passed away in an accident where he had a bad fall, Nathaniel restored his face so he could have an open casket funeral. By restoring his father, Nathaniel gives Rico and his mother one last chance to see his father before saying goodbye, and Rico's reaction is as though he's seen some kind of miracle performed. The moment both captures how Rico sees the value in what someone like Nathaniel does and the appreciation he has for Nathaniel as a person. Rico would show up later to help out around the funeral home with some chores, and their friendship developed to the point where Nathaniel helped put him through mortuary school. When Rico imagines Nathaniel's spirit visiting him, he's much more kind and peaceful than the version his children see, and I think that reflects Rico's special fondness for the man and the business he represented. In the first season, Fisher & Son comes under direct threat from Kroner, a giant corporation purchasing smaller funeral homes to add to their growing roster. Nate and David don't take kindly to their representative, Matthew Gilardi, played by Gary Hirschberger.
I'm not saying anyone's going to die. There are tragedies far worse than death, things you couldn't even dream of, you spineless candy-ass corporate fuck.
The threat of Kroner hangs over the funeral home immediately in the series, and Rico becomes a pawn when he's offered better pay and benefits if he joins Kroner's group of restorative artists.
Within 8 months, I can offer you your own home.
Rico's time at Kroner doesn't last long, and he soon learns he's just another cog in the machine and the promises made to him don't come true, an unsurprising turn for a series that frequently expresses skepticism towards corporate America. As the funeral home is fighting for its life, Rico is frequently fighting to be a bigger part of it.
I want to be a partner.
That would require a significant financial investment on your part. That's what partners are.
It doesn't help that the Fishers aren't always the most welcoming.
We're more than just your employers, Rico.
All that's bullshit, David, and you know it. When it's convenient, we're like family. But in a pinch, I'm just an employee. And you and Nate are just my bosses.
The Kroner plotline eventually comes to an abrupt end when the company goes under in the second season, but there's still many stories that have an impact on how we see funeral services as a business. The DVD commentary by Bruce Eric Kaplan helps clarify. This reminds us that this is still a business being run, and that involves the small duties that businesses require to turn a profit.
The show itself is about the demystification and sort of the acceptance, actually more importantly, of death. And part of that acceptance is to show the mundane aspects of death.
But it was an episode in season 3 titled Nobody Sleeps that made me consider this from another perspective. In this episode, a gay man is honoring his recently deceased partner with lavish spending for an opera-themed funeral. While reading The American Way of Death, one of the criticisms I came across was how pageantry or ceremonial excess was often used as an exploitative capitalist tool to extract as much money as possible from people to express their love for the deceased. This is something the show frequently comments on, with arguments over upselling caskets, charging for additional services, or how payments are collected. It's very easy to see how the funeral service business can target people when they're very vulnerable, making them think they need to spend as much money as possible to adequately express their grief. But in this episode, this lavish opera funeral, which cost the bereaved an enormous amount as several services had to be canceled just so this one could be held, and obviously the construction of all of this, and hiring all these people would have a hefty price tag attached to it. But it seems as though this excess is necessary for the grieving process. When you look at the reactions from the bereaved, real emotional work is being done in this service, and the comfort is genuine. All of this was sold to them by a business, but came from the wishes of someone who wanted to mourn a loved one, rather than being exploited. Thinking back to the solitary woman mourned by Ruth, the far plainer funeral service also had a similar importance. To acknowledge the passing of someone, even if the money could have just as easily been donated to a charity, rather than hold a service for someone no one was really there to remember. It was the wishes of the deceased that were being adhered to. She had previously paid for a pre-need funeral service before she had passed. The act of mourning and a costly funeral can be viewed as a waste of money, but that's really only a decision for the deceased and their loved ones. I think the proper criticism isn't to simply lambaste an industry broadly for charging a lot of money, but rather sharply criticize where the profit motive has encouraged predatory funeral homes. As the show frequently makes clear, when someone is more concerned with providing a means to grieve rather than turning a quick buck, it can be a very necessary service. But the show also makes it clear that, particularly with the Kroner storyline, there's an ugly side to this industry that wants to turn the funeral service into a new fast food industry. How to walk that fine line and the ethics around funeral services is an important question to ask, and one that I think is often missing from broader social critiques regarding the capitalist system we all live under. While the character of Nate is clearly meant to represent the critique of profiteering in the funeral industry, as seen in the pilot, Rico, I think, represents a counterpoint to that position, one that's represented in the services such as the lavish opera one or the unattended one. He sees within these elaborate funerals something of value that's more than just padding the bill. Rico is concerned for the welfare of his family and wants them to be provided for, but it's not as simple as trying to make as much money as possible.
Oh, your mother already chose a casket, sir. It's in her pre-need. She liked this one.
Well, this looks like some kind of gangbanger, lowrider, I don't know what. Okay, now she chose this one because she was living on a fixed income. I have money, and I want to change it.
She liked this one, and this is the one that she should have.
He understands the importance of ceremony and mourning and what that means to the bereaved, and he understands a lot of this from a specific cultural context.
Well, you sold them a casket for $4,000. You added another $600 just to switch handles, $3,000 for the monument, another $400 for doves. I mean, it just goes on.
This is their youngest daughter they're burying, Nate.
The guy works in a machine shop. You can't afford this.
Besides learning to mangle a few words in Spanish, maybe you should learn a little something about Latin culture as well. We honor our dead, Nate.
And end up broke because of it.
Oh, that is so fucking racist.
How am I being racist? You're the one who said it's a cultural thing.
Every single member of the family pitches in at moments like this. Everyone. We take care of each other. No one's left broke.
Both characters make interesting points, though they reflect not just different philosophies on ethical business practices, but also the cultural basis for mourning. Rico's presence at the funeral home reflects this mixing of two cultures, both personally and in business. As the series progresses, Rico is able to buy a stake in the company and become a partner. So Fisher & Sons becomes Fisher & Diaz. Rico was more than just the outsider. He was also a representative of his Puerto Rican heritage, something not terribly common on American television, and also something Freddy Rodriguez took great pride in.
It was one of the first times that you saw a normal Latin American family that didn't embody any stereotype that you saw at the time. And so I think we were hailed in our community as being groundbreakers, and I'm really proud to be a pioneer.
One of the challenges the writers faced was a lack of Latin American voices on staff, so the actors often had to advocate for changes to improve the quality of the scripts. Listening to one of the writers at the time on a DVD commentary, Joey Soloway, it seems to have been a good working relationship.
I'll never forget this. Justina said to me, what if you were an actress and you were on a sitcom and you were playing a Jewish character and your character just said, oy vey, all the time, or come on, who wants to go get some gefilte fish, or I want a corned beef sandwich, or all of these like Jewish things constantly. It'd be so offensive to perform in and so offensive to do as an actress. And she said that's kind of what it feels like when you guys are putting in tamales and burritos and Dios mío here and there.
One cute touch is that Rico's son, Julio, was actually played by Freddy Rodriguez's real-life son. Rico's ethnicity also created the opportunity for exploring perspectives outside of the usual repressed WASP Fisher family. Sometimes that would include more conservative attitudes, such as Rico's homophobia or his adherence to strict gender roles.
I'm going 8 to 10 hours a day, missing my kids to get us what we need. I don't need a fucking handout!
Please, I don't want to hear any machismo bullshit today, okay?
What did you say to me?
We saw Rico change a lot over the course of the series, and perhaps the biggest agent of that change was the period of time when he was cut off from his family. It's a long story that begins with Rico struggling to cope with Vanessa's depression following her mother's death. Eventually, that sees him having a relationship with a stripper named Sophia that gradually destroys his marriage, and suddenly he finds himself living a single life. For much of these episodes, we see Rico being petty, deceitful, and generally a worse version of himself. And it's clear he was a better person when he was with Vanessa. Over time, the two do reconcile, but at first it's really Vanessa trying to be practical, needing a reliable man around the house. In time, they start to work through their issues, and simultaneously, Rico is continuing a push for a greater hand in the funeral home, talking about making the business a bigger part of the community and reaching out to Latin American members of that community.
Fisher & Diaz needs to be a visible member in our community. We should be sponsoring soccer teams and...
Rico, I'm going to stop you right there.
We can see how Rico has gone from a restorative artist with limited people skills to someone who has grown into a very effective funeral director. Following Nate's death, Rico is very concerned about the future of the business, and with David grieving, much of the work is starting to fall on him. Rico convinces Vanessa to lend a hand, and they find out she's pretty good at helping people in their grief.
I called the realtor. I'm gonna go see that place tomorrow at noon. You wanna come?
At this point in the story, Rico is already considering starting his own funeral home business, and with Vanessa there to support him, it would be the start of his own family-run business. By working together, we finally see Vanessa and Rico getting along in ways that are reminiscent of happier days for them. It's almost like the business helped heal their marriage. Rico's journey is one where the funeral service world had a profound impact on his life, not only in the meaning he finds in his work, but in how it helped him hold his family together. Though he ironically couldn't provide support to his grieving wife, he does learn how to support strangers. This may speak to how we see a funeral director in our lives, not as someone who will carry us through our grief, but as someone who will provide compassion and support to help with a part of the grieving process. Rico's story often left him feeling like an outsider compared to the other characters who seem to be in or closely related to the Fisher family. But Rico is still an important part of the show's makeup, often trying to understand the grieving process through a lens that isn't dominated by one family's drama. If the Fishers can be understood to be the American tradition of business being dominated by white Americans, Rico is the face of change to that dynamic. An American from a later wave of immigration, trying to find his way in a world dominated by connections that are more than professional. The Fishers are a better path to that than big corporations like Kroner, but eventually he realizes that there's a limit to what he can achieve in that space. He will never be an insider in that world, and instead he has to build something of his own. What Rico does isn't a revolutionary way of changing the world, but for him and his family, it does create something that they can build on. When we first meet Claire, she is the least defined character in the show, which makes sense since she's still in high school and starting to figure out who she is as she enters adulthood. One of the few things we know is that she feels out of place, both in her family and at school. This is symbolized by the avocado green hearse she drives, an old one she got from her father that she repainted. The hearse, much like Claire, doesn't quite fit in at school, and it doesn't quite fit in at the Fisher home. Claire dates the wrong guys and is indifferent to her studies, wondering what the point is growing up into a cold, indifferent world.
Is that the only option? Go to college, get a job, so you can be a good consumer until you drop dead of exhaustion. I don't want that.
So what do you want?
I just want something to matter.
Part of Claire's frustration comes from a genuine disillusionment, but part of it also comes from not knowing how to grieve for her father, and she doesn't really have the support at home to help her with that. Not out of indifference to her feelings, but as we've already seen, everyone else in her family was struggling with their own challenges responding to Nathaniel's death. In the second season, we start to learn more about Claire as an artist, one of the few things that seems to be unique to her, and something that actually has long been a part of her identity.
Oh my god, it's Blue Pajama Man. I totally forgot about him.
I kept everything you ever did.
Photography in particular is where her talent lies.
I took some photos with like a friend's camera, and then I wanted to keep doing it, so I went on eBay and I got my own, but it was really just because I was bored and it's kind of stupid.
A lot of care and attention is put into Claire's art to ensure it showed her as a teenager with talent, but not necessarily a prodigy. It's a tricky thing to depict a convincing young artist in a medium, and I thought the series walked a good line that balanced relatability with her unique vision of the world. Becoming an artist also offers Claire the opportunity to grow out of her apathy towards the world, when finishing high school brings with it the chance to attend art school. In her admission interview, she reveals more of herself than she expects.
But then I started to make stuff that was sort of about that at first, you know, and then stuff that was about other things too. And I'm sorry that I'm rambling right now, but I guess I just want you to know that I feel like I have this way now of like dealing.
One of the comments Alan Ball made about the scene in the DVD commentary is that Claire has never really grieved for her father, and so all this pent-up emotion is coming out. And I think it speaks directly on what art means to her, and why it has become a part of her identity, because it gave her an outlet for emotions she otherwise couldn't express. This goes back once again to the repressed family she grew up in, where feelings were hidden from others. Claire didn't come prepared to deliver that speech, but was realizing it in the moment. And that realization and the bravery to confront it informs her art. The photographs she takes are an attempt to capture the real world around her and see it in a way that reveals a deeper truth. not just a truth she might expect, but any truth that might suddenly confront her. And it takes a lot of courage to look directly into the unexpected, confront whatever that may be, and then share that with the world. Claire's time in art school brings with it a host of new characters and experiences for her, and builds on her growth in the first 2 seasons as an artist. Claire's teacher Olivier, played by Peter Macdisi, is at first blush the sort of romantic vision of the inspirational art teacher, offering pearls of wisdom that encourage Claire's growth.
Every work you make has to be a surprise to the earth, a seeing that never happened before. Because it's what happens when exactly what is inside of you confronts exactly what is outside of you.
But sometimes he seems to be completely full of shit.
Olivier, do you think I should have priced my photograph higher?
You too, with a price tag on the placement. It's disgusting. 20 years old, you should want to give your work away.
As Olivier chews out Claire and Russell, we can see that he's selling his artwork for $20,000. This duality of Olivier was very intentional, as explained by Michael Engler in a DVD audio commentary.
I thought it was important here to really allow for the possibility that he might be brilliant and inspiring, and he might possibly be completely full of shit, and there might be some combination of those two things that was also true.
Later in the season, Claire becomes Olivier's assistant, only to learn it's a series of boring tasks like driving him around and running other errands. When Olivier sends her on a particularly long trip, he has sex with Claire's boyfriend, Russell, played by Ben Foster.
You sit in such judgment of the world. How do you expect to ever be a part of it?
I don't want to be a part of your world where you get to be a totally manipulative loser who fucks his students.
It's hard to really fully express how full of crap Olivier is in this exchange. To sleep with one of your students is already a violation, but to pretend as though Claire is trying to sit in judgment when she was personally hurt by the experience is incredibly insensitive. The image of an eccentric artist flouting the conventions of society has all this romance wrapped around it, but it doesn't justify destructive behavior that hurts others, and it certainly doesn't delegitimize their feelings of hurt. Claire, seen through all this artifice, is a major part of her development. And don't mistake me, this isn't a question of morality. Claire didn't need to learn that any of Olivier's behavior was wrong. She could have told you that before any of it happened. What she learned was how to see through Olivier's presentation of being an artist, hiding behind that eccentric behavior as a cover for selfishly indulging at the expense of those around you. Claire takes lessons on art from Olivier that might be useful, but she isn't trapped into thinking he is some kind of authority that must be obeyed. It's a microcosm of an education that fosters real growth. Critical engagement with one's teacher rather than becoming a repository of received knowledge. An important part of school is recognizing that one of your teachers, even one that you really respect, can in some cases be completely full of crap. Claire's connection to Russell is also important. He is part of a large group of friends that give Claire's school life a bit more color. There's Anita, played by Sprague Graydon, Edie, played by Mina Suvari, and Jimmy, played by Peter Facinelli. Russell had a connection to one of Claire's more memorable pieces of art, a series of photos that display photo collages that have been turned into sculptures that fit around people's bodies, something he takes a small amount of credit for in class when she's trying to present it as her own work.
When I first put the pictures of Claire's open eyes over her closed eyes, I was thinking of her as sculpture.
What Russell's doing here is referencing earlier in the series when, unbeknownst to him, Claire had become pregnant while they were dating and she terminated the pregnancy without telling him.
One of the coolest things about this was that we did it together. I liked that, just working with you.
Claire would take all the credit for the art in a show she had later on, and this raises a very messy question about authorship. While it's true Claire's piece wouldn't have been made without Russell providing a spark of inspiration, all the work afterward was done by Claire. It's an interesting analogy to pregnancy, and it also emphasizes how, in both cases, it's Claire who determines if and how the endeavor is completed. Something that the show never really contradicts, but does try in some ways to establish that there is something Russell is trying to say here, although I don't think it's actually a positive thing. Russell's position here is a bit creepy, in that what he enjoyed about the art project was that it connected him to Claire, rather than creating the work itself. He hadn't even thought that far ahead, it was just him enjoying his time with her. So too was the pregnancy an expression of Russell's desire to be with Claire, rather any attempt to create a child. If Claire had chosen to carry the pregnancy to term, would it be a child Russell would want, or just an excuse to tie himself to Claire? And you could say the same thing about the art project. Going back to when Claire confronted Olivier, we saw how she was able to assert herself over him in a private moment. But Russell's moment happens in front of the entire class. It's a public humiliation for Claire. In both cases, we can see an injustice, but for Claire, she wanted to settle things personally, while Russell felt the need to set a public record straight. The gendered nature of their respective approaches, I think, show us how men feel more of an entitlement to public space to express their grievance. Later on in the series, Claire did acknowledge Russell's gesture towards creating the artwork, though it took her some time and perspective to understand his point of view. Russell wouldn't be the only man to have a profound impact on Claire's life as she was becoming an artist. By the end of season 4, we have the culmination of her long-standing flirtation with Billy, Brenda's brother. In the first season, he was clearly using her to get under Nate's skin, though this eventually turned into an online friendship after Billy was committed. Perhaps most importantly, it was Billy, a photographer himself, putting a camera into Claire's hands that set her on a path with the art form. Claire later learns Billy was once Olivier's assistant as well, and that they slept together. And then later on, Billy even becomes a teacher at the art school. So we can see that Billy and Claire's lives have been intersecting in a lot of important ways, almost suggesting that this relationship had some kind of thread of fate joining them.
I'm kind of getting addicted to spicy stuff. Like, if it doesn't hurt a little bit, it's not really worth eating.
I'm familiar with that dynamic.
6 Feet Under is not the kind of show that does the whole thread of fate thing. And Billy, of course, is not an ideal partner. There's something very strange about Billy ending up with the sister of the man who is dating his sister, especially considering his obsessive relationship with Brenda. And at Nate and Brenda's wedding, it's clear that Billy is still upset about losing his sister to Nate. While Billy did seem to feel something for Claire, it's tangled up in his own history with Brenda that any kind of relationship with Claire would forever be under the shadow of the relationship between Nate and Brenda, and its impact on Billy. When Billy goes off his meds, Claire dumps him, which is an important symbol for where she's going in her life. Billy sent Claire on her path as an artist, not just handing her a camera, but he also wrote her a letter of recommendation into the art school. But his outbursts make her fear for her own safety, and she wants him out of her life entirely. At this point, she's also dropped out of art school, lost out on an art grant, and her artwork isn't really being shown in galleries anymore. She's effectively severed from the art world she had been living in. And so instead, she enters the far more mundane world of doing temp work. Her office is a nightmare.
Hey, Johnny, have you met Claire yet?
Yeah, baby.
That's an Austin Powers reference for anyone who might not remember or perhaps wasn't alive back then. They really enjoy that joke, and it's very annoying.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby. Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby.
That last guy to do it, Ted, played by Chris Messina, is sweet on Claire, and completely unlike any of the guys she's dated. She opens up to him about herself in a nice moment.
I've just been a little uninspired, so I haven't really been doing much of anything. And now it sort of feels like maybe that's over, which is kind of scary because that's how I've always defined myself. But then again, maybe it's kind of freeing in a strange way.
Oh, I'm glad you told me.
When they go out on a date, it's revealed just how different they are as people.
That stupid evil war goes on and on.
Stupid evil? I don't think so.
Right.
We eliminated a murdering asshole dictator. And now we're establishing democracy, which of course takes time. But we have to stabilize the Middle East.
This also happens to be the same episode where Nate is hospitalized and eventually dies, and in spite of their political disagreements, Ted takes Claire to the hospital and stays with her through the night.
You'd do the same thing for me, wouldn't you?
I would now.
There's an interesting parallel to the other Fisher siblings as well. In the first episode, we see Brenda go with Nate to the hospital after Nathaniel dies, and when Keith's niece Taylor is sick, David stays at the hospital for Keith. In all of these instances, someone is staying the night at the hospital for someone who they technically aren't really in a relationship with. And I think it establishes how strong connections are formed by simply being there for someone in a difficult time. Claire and Ted don't just have different politics, they come from different worlds. She's an art school dropout and he's a frat boy lawyer, but a gesture of human decency connects the two of them. When Nate dies, Claire starts crashing out at work, showing up drunk and getting into arguments. The context for this one is that Claire is confronting a coworker who has a crush on Ted and is under the mistaken impression that she and Ted are going to start dating one day.
You are gonna be so fired.
Yeah, well, I'm fucking Ted.
Later in the episode, Claire flips the hearse she drives and has to find her way back home, feeling wrecked about losing her brother. In the same episode, we see the speech from Holly Duncan, played by Amy Spanger, grieving her veteran brother who took his own life after losing his arm and legs in the Iraq War.
I mean, I grew up thinking I was born in the time when there was the internet, you know? And the fall of communism and the gap. Turns out my time is when there's like 9/11, a bunch of wars, and the end of everything. My brother's dead.
I'm sure he was a good man.
He was fine. That's all he needed to be. That's all anyone needs to be, is fine. They shouldn't have to get destroyed.
Claire's despair and grief reflect a kind of fear and disillusionment with America in 2005, a country that reacted to 9/11 by launching invasions that would lead to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis while expanding the national security state, giving the American people a massive amount of debt, and sending people like Holly's brother overseas to die or be maimed. As one of the few loudly political characters on the show in its final season, Claire's anger is justified, and even more so in retrospect. Her romance with Ted carries with it a seeming contradiction, as his beliefs clearly clash with hers. But what it actually reminds us of is that, in spite of those political differences, there is a type of kindness that can connect us on a human level. And while that's something to hold on to, and certainly isn't meaningless, I think it's also important to point out that this kind of love won't bring back Holly Duncan's brother. The finale to 6 Feet Under is often heralded as one of the greatest of all time, and part of what I think makes it so great is how it builds on 5 seasons of history for these characters. The plot isn't too complicated. Instead of an opening death, we instead see Willa born. As the episode moves on, Rico and Vanessa open up their new business, David takes over the family business to restore it to Fisher & Sons, and Ruth moves in with her sister Sarah to start a new chapter in her life. But the focal point for this final episode is Claire. In the final episode, Claire is offered a job in New York City, although she considers staying behind because of the immense loss everyone experienced because of Nate's death.
I don't regret you, or any of my children, or Nathaniel even. But I do regret never giving myself any choice. I won't let you make the same mistake.
When Claire finds out the job is gone, a vision of Nate convinces her that she should still go to New York City.
I spent my whole life being scared. Scared of not being ready, of not being right, not being who I should be. And where did it get me?
When Nate left Los Angeles, he was running away out of fear. But for Claire, she's leaving to start a new chapter and grow into a new person. As the series comes to a close, we see Claire say goodbye to everyone.
Can't take a picture of this, it's already gone.
And we get one of the most memorable montages in TV history as we see Claire drive down the road towards her new life. There are flashes of the future that reveal the lives of each of these characters, including their eventual deaths, with Breathe Me by Sia playing in the background. If you've never seen this particular segment, I'm tempted to tell you to stop right now and go watch it on its own. And really, you should watch the whole series leading up to this point. But assuming you've done that, I want to break down these flashes into the future in detail. Something that does rob it of its magic, but is, I think, interesting for anyone who's familiar with it. A lot of this information comes from the DVD commentary from Alan Ball, though several other cited sources also helped inform this section. The image of Nate falling behind is the last sign of the past, slowly being left behind. From here, we start moving into the future. First, we see Ruth and Bettina running a doggy daycare, much like the job Nate tried to have after he left the funeral home, before he was dragged back in to help David work through his trauma. Next, we see David teaching Darrell the basics of his work. Darrell is the new son in Fisher & Sons. 1 year later, it's Willa's birthday, and everyone has gathered to celebrate. You'll notice Billy is holding an adorable dog. That's actually Jeremy Sisto's real-life dog, which he brought to the set for a visit. When Alan Ball saw the dog, he thought it would be really funny that, since Brenda had a child, Billy felt like he should have something similar. So they decided Billy got a dog. 4 years from Claire's departure, David and Keith finally get married. It was assumed gay marriage would eventually be legal in 2009, although this somewhat missed the mark. Gay marriage wouldn't be made legal in California until 2013, although marriage licenses were given out in 2008. The man sitting next to Brenda is her husband, and his name is Forrest Nathanson. And yeah, it's weird how the name Nathaniel keeps following her around. Maya can be identified by the stuffed animal that Ruth was fretting over in an earlier scene in this episode. One cute detail is that sitting between Rico and Vanessa is Alan Poole, a producer on the show. Alan Ball also had a cameo in this episode. He was the speaker in a voicemail regarding Claire's job offer in New York City. Ruth's death is the first one we see, and it happens in 2025, and it feels very strange to be making this video in that year. R.I.P. Ruth. The man standing next to David at Ruth's funeral is grown-up Darrell, while grown-up Anthony is sitting next to Keith, and Maya is sitting next to George. Of course, Ted is still himself, there for Claire in an important moment. You might miss in Keith's death that the security van he is exiting has his name on it, so it seems that he started his own business. At Claire's wedding, you can see that David and Keith's children have found love, with Darrell having a son, but easier to miss is Willa, who is sitting 2 spots from Brenda. David seeing Keith before he has a stroke is bittersweet. And though we don't see it, Michael C. Hall is actually doing a full fall while filming this. It was just decided that with several characters falling and dying, it would be better to cut rather than show every single fall. The one fall we do see is in the next death, and that's Rico's on a cruise with Vanessa. I've read conflicting details about Rico's death fall, but according to Alan Ball, who directed the episode, it was a stuntman standing in for Freddie Rodriguez, rather than Freddie Rodriguez wearing prosthetics like all the other actors in their death scenes. All of Billy's dialogue in the scene where Brenda dies was ad-libbed, and while it wasn't meant to be funny, it is nonetheless very funny to think that Brenda chose death rather than spend any more time with Billy. It's also kind of sad that Billy, however many decades later, is still fretting over Claire. Jeremy Sisto hypothesized that Billy died shortly after Brenda because he wouldn't be able to survive without her. The woman in the final moments of the series, of course, wasn't actually Lauren Ambrose, but instead another actor who would take her place. The actor is in her 70s, and they gave her quite a bit of makeup to make her appear even older. As Claire drives down the road, we get a classic piece of imagery that's used throughout 6 Feet Under of a long road stretching into the horizon. The idea to end the series with the deaths of all the characters was thought up by one of the show's writers, though which one specifically is something I couldn't figure out. The only consistent answer I found from Alan Ball's many interviews on the subject is that he doesn't remember who suggested it, and he feels pretty bad about that. He describes the writers' meeting saying, "I had always had an instinct that Nate would have to die, since his whole journey was coming to terms with his own mortality. But we didn't want to end the final episode of the series like that. Once we figured out how to have him die 3 episodes from the end, suddenly it all started to fall into place. Somebody said, we should just kill everybody. I wish I could remember which other writer it was who pitched this because it wasn't me. And everybody laughed. And then whoever it was said, no, I'm serious. We should jump ahead in time and see everybody at the moment of their death. At which point I went, of course. I mean, that's the perfect way to end the show. How else could you do it? The choice to use Sia's Breathe Me was made before the final episode even began filming. The song first came up as a suggestion for an earlier episode, but Ball thought it would be more powerful for the finale, so it was held on to until then. He said in an interview, I wrote the scene to fit that song, with that music in mind. I didn't, time out each shot to the song, because you can't do that, but every shot was pretty specific. I know I wanted the wheels on Claire's Prius to start turning right at the moment the music sort of amps up, which was a reference to the gurney wheels turning in the title sequence. As a companion to the final montage, a series of obituaries were written for each of the characters. They would also be collected in a little book and included in the DVD box set for the series. The one you're seeing right now is my own personal copy. The actors had some interesting reflections on the finale. Francis Conroy said, I was just crying. I thought, this is magnificent. Where did Alan pull this out of himself? How did he find this? It was just gorgeous. Michael C. Hall said, when I read it, I thought, as I think the audience did when they saw it, of course. I'd never seen something so simultaneously surprising and satisfyingly obvious as the way that show ended. And once that first card comes up, you're just there as the waves continue to crash over you. Richard Jenkins remarked, it showed the kind of respect that Alan had for the audience. You've been with us for 5 years. This is what happened. You deserve to know what happened to these people. Lauren Ambrose had a particularly moving moment in an article that charted the oral history of the finale. The square brackets here were added in by the writer of the article. When asked about the porch scene, when Claire takes one last picture of the family, Ambrose goes silent and takes a long pause. I'm crying, audibly sobs. It's still in me. 6 Feet Under was very warmly received critically, winning several awards, including 9 Emmys. Its ratings were not quite as stellar, although it was a strong performer, getting over 5 million viewers in its first 2 seasons. It declined in its third before settling to 2.5 for its final season. The decision to end the series came from Alan Ball, though HBO was certainly interested in doing more with it. But when Ball said he wanted to move on, they didn't want to do any more without him. Before that decision to end the series, there was some discussion over what might be the show's 6th season. And according to an interview with Alan Ball, pitches included a post-apocalyptic world after a nuclear strike or Ruth developing Alzheimer's. I slightly suspect that the first one is a joke, but honestly, it didn't read that way to me in the article where I found it. Following the end of 6 Feet Under, Peter Krause would star in the shows Dirty Sexy Money, Parenthood, and The Catch. Most recently, he has been in 911. Michael C. Hall would most famously star in the series Dexter, as well as its various spin-offs. He's been in several stage productions and movies as well, and in 2010 he underwent treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma, and thankfully the cancer has fully gone into remission. Frances Conroy appeared in American Horror Story and the 2019 Joker movie. According to her family, she has retired from acting as of 2024. Lauren Ambrose would appear in the Torchwood Miracle Days series, another series called Servant, and is currently appearing in Yellow Jackets. She has also appeared several times on Broadway. Rachel Griffiths appeared in the series Brothers and Sisters and in the movie Hacksaw Ridge. Most recently, she was in the series Total Control. Matthew St. Patrick joined the series Reunion and also appeared in Sons of Anarchy and NCIS. Freddie Rodriguez went on to star in the movie Planet Terror and appear in the series Ugly Betty and Bull. His next upcoming project is Days When the Rain Came. Reflecting on the series years later, Alan Ball was asked if it changed his perspective on death. He said, "I think it felt to me like it was therapeutic working on the show. And by the end of those 5 years, I thought, I've really made great strides in my acceptance of mortality. And since then, I've realized, no, I haven't. That was just wishful thinking on my part. I still hate it. I still hate that it's going to happen. I'm still terrified of it, just like everybody else is. But spending 8 hours a day in a room with really smart, funny, interesting, complicated people, talking about the ways that death impacts our lives, and writing about characters whose business is death, I think gave me a false sense of security that maybe I'll achieve again at some point." Rewatching the series myself, many years after seeing it for the first time, I share the same feeling. It creates this kind of peace in your mind about the end, though I know I'm not really ready for any kind of death, and I'm not sure anyone can be fully ready for something like that. The grieving process is never really about accepting death, as much as we might want the pain to go away. Rather, through the ritual of a funeral and the community it provides, we can, just for a little bit, have someone to experience that grief with. To create the impression that this heavy load is being shared by someone else, and maybe a lot of someone else's, so we can somehow all get through it together. Reading some of the impressions people had of this show nearly 25 years later, a lot of it reflected this kind of comfort. Although, as you get away from the show in time, you start to remember it less. Kind of like when a person dies, it's not the funeral that sticks with you, but the memories you shared instead, and the lingering scar of sadness. The grieving process is the bridge you need to cross to make that sadness more bearable. In many ways, I feel as though this show was similar. 6 Feet Under was a show that was credited with ending so perfectly it never needs to be returned to. And when you think about it, that sounds like the life anyone would want, living without any major regrets and knowing you went out on your best note. Even if it's not celebrated the way some other shows are, it does deserve to be remembered and memorialized in our hearts. One of the delights in creating videos like these is going back to a show you had very strong feelings about when you were younger and discovering it still holds up just as strongly as it did back then. Maybe I'm just the sort of person who resonates with 6 Feet Under in a particularly unique way, but the way it tells a story just works so effectively for me. I wish it were easier to recommend, as it's a show that is a very heavy investment, both time-wise and emotionally. But for anyone willing to put in the effort, I think it's certainly worth it. And I hope that this video was worth your time as well. It certainly took a lot of my time to make it, so I do hope you appreciated and enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it, perhaps become a patron for this channel. You'll continue to see more videos like these made in the future, and you'll get a lot of fun extras, such as seeing your name in the credits, early access to videos, and other fun stuff I throw in every now and again. You can also become a YouTube member, and I'm also on Nebula if you'd like to find my work there. If you'd like to support this channel in a non-monetary fashion, you can like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, or share this video on social media. Thank you all so much for watching.